Alright, hi guys. I am Todd Father, previous rank 1 fighter globally, the current rank 3 fighter for kills, and I do a lot of streaming, and every time I'm streaming I always get a ton of questions about fighter, what builds I like to run, what my gear looks like, what skills I run, what perks I run, all that. So I thought I would just try to put together like a comprehensive fighter guide to help anyone get into it, even experienced players. Hopefully they can learn something, and new players getting into the class. I hope that can be of some help as well. So to start things off, I kind of just want to talk about fighter as a character. Fighter is the general tank of the game. In most games, fighter is really a jack of all trades, master of none. In this game, that's not really the case. I do strongly believe fighter has one correct build, in quotes, that is the most optimal and generally is the one you should be going whenever you're playing the game. And just a disclaimer, my experience is all with 3v3s in the crypts. For Goblin Caves and High Roller Solos, I do not have enough experience to speak on it, so I will refrain from talking about that. Although I will mention Goblin Caves slightly, this will only be for early wipe and starting the game off solo. So back to Fighter as a character. Fighter is the traditional tank of the game. You stack a lot of armor, a lot of physical damage reduction, and you just don't really take any damage from anything physical. You create space for your team, and creating space, what exactly does that mean? Well, creating space generally means that you allow your backline, whether that be ranger, wizard, cleric, whatever they are, they're allowed to do everything they want within their space. There's no one back there invading their space, preventing them to play the game the way they want. And that is generally the role you want to fulfill. Fighter can do lots of damage because they do have very high damaging weapons, but that is usually not your main goal. And now, I think for stat prio, you want to go over here for fighter. Like you see, they have a pretty even stat balance across the board. With it's 15, 15, 15, 15. I have a ring on here, so you see 15 across the board. So pretty even build here. Just looking at stats that we most likely want to prio, it's strength and agility. These are your two primary stats here. Strength is every point will give you 2 HP and 1% physical power, and then agility, every point increases your attack speed and your movement speed. I'm not sure the exact numbers, but that's what agility does. And I think the two main builds here you can go into as a fighter will be a strength fighter or an agility fighter. Even if you go into an agility fighter or a strength fighter, generally speaking, you want some points into the other stat to really be helpful. For example, if you go agility fighter, agility is going to be your main stat, but without any real points into strength, you see your HP pool is going to be very low, only at 100 for a tank. Strength, on the other hand, as long as you push a bunch of points into it, you're going to be very healthy. However, if you're lacking that agility, you will have a much lower base movement speed because we are wearing a lot of heavy armor. And even with one of our perks that decreases the value, it's still a very large amount. Alright, and now for perks and skills, I think there are several different builds you can go here on Fighter. To start off with, I'm going to talk about one I think is really good for an early wipe, or if you're just getting started off with no gear. Like, for example, you see here, this character has no gear on. And that's, you're going to go with Slayer. Slayer is a perk where you cannot equip plate armor, but you gain 5 weapon damage bonus when holding a weapon in each hand. So what you're going to do is you're going to put Slayer on, then you're going to pair this with Dual Wield. Dual Wield's another perk that's useful for dual wield's another perk that's useful for dual wielding, and whenever you have 2 weapons equipped, you increase your attack speed by 15%. And then when you have these 2 perks on, you're going to go down here and change your skills, and so you're going to keep Sprint because movement speed is very important for this character, but instead of Second Wind, you're going to put on Adrenaline Rush. And Adrenaline Rush is what it does. When you pop it, you get 25% attack speed for 8 seconds, and then you have reduced action speed and movement speed by 4% for 4 seconds after it ends. So basically, the whole point of this build is you're going to use your movement speed because you're not going to be able to wear plate with Slayer on. You're gonna have a lot more movement speed than a fighter normally would. So you're going to pop Sprint. You're going to try to get into a close range with a person. You're going to pop Adrenaline Rush, and then with Adrenaline Rush and Dual Wield, you have a ton of attack speed. So you're literally just going to turn into a blender, and you can output a large amount of damage. And a really easy way to get this build started is, like I said, you get Slayer and Dual Wield, or just like let's say you just started, you just put Slayer on. You're gonna go to your merchant, you're gonna go to your weaponsmith, and then right here a white falchion, or right here a gray falchion, 8 gold. Buy it, Castellan dagger, and 6 gold. Because ideally, whenever you're dual wielding, you're only going to usually be attacking with one weapon, so you want your offhand weapon to be as light as possible. The Castellan dagger only has a -10 movement speed, so therefore it's a very good choice to pair with the falchion. or you can go with an Arming Sword as well. Arming Sword is a much faster swing, but has lower damage per hit. But both of these are perfectly fine options. I just personally prefer the Falchion to the Arming Sword for a Slayer build. And then to finish this off for perks, we're going to be looking for Combo Attack right here. This just gives you extra damage each time you attack. And then for the last one, you can really go a lot of different things. Adrenaline Spike's a potential one. If you get really low, you get a ton of % more action speed. Projectile Resistance, if you are dealing with archers, because you know they're shooting you a lot, hurts. This will give you a nice 10% off. And then Weapon Mastery is also another good one. Weapon Mastery lets you use weapons you normally wouldn't be able to for a 10% damage penalty. This allows you to use like a longbow or recurve bow, as opposed to using a normal crossbow, which is something the fighter actually can't use. Alright, and then for our next build, which I think is obviously going to be a significantly more meta one, we're going to go Defense Mastery, Shield Mastery, Barricade, and Swift. Now these two right here, Defense Mastery and Swift, these are your bread and butter for any plate fighter build. Swift, as you can see, reduces the base movement speed penalty from equipped armor by 20%, and then Defense Mastery increases AR acquired from armor by 10%. And AR will be this armor rating you see right here from armor rating. This just increases, like for example, if I go here, my armor rating of this Adventurer Tunic is 14 and my Cloth Pants is 8. So therefore, I'm getting, as you can see, 22 armor rating from this. But you see out here, I have 25. That's the 10% coming in. This is obviously not very much, but then when you get to the point where you're stacking really good plate armor, like you see this Templar armor or this Fine Cuirass that has a ton, and I equip all of it, like let's see. I have 244 armor rating. I have 53%, and I'm getting, obviously, like, that's including the 10%. That is a much bigger value. So generally speaking, that is always a perk you're going to want to run with this, because it's giving you so much extra armor rating. And then Swift, this is the perk that basically allows you to move around in plate armor, because it reduces the base movement penalty from equipped armor by 20%. Without this on, it is pretty much impossible for you to catch anyone, because you're just so slow from all the plate armor debuffs. And then for these other two perks, you have Shield Mastery and Barricade. Barricade is when in a defensive stance, the defense rating bonus is increased by 15%. Something to note is it says defensive stance, it does not say blocking. For example, a defensive stance also counts the longsword's parry. So if you're holding up a longsword and parrying, that counts a defensive stance, and your defense rating bonus is increased by 15%. And also, this right here, defense rating bonus, what this means is, it doesn't count magic resist, it's only physical damage reduction. It will just give you a flat 15% added to this number. So for example, let me see, let me throw this back on. Oh, take that off. Oh. So you see, for example, I have 1.1%. So if I were to block with a shield or parry with a or have my longsword parry up, I would have 16.1% physical damage reduction here. So it is just a flat additive 15%. And then Shield Mastery, its movement speed is increased by 10% while in defensive stance, and upon successfully block an attack, the next block is 50% faster. See, this is another point where it says defensive stance and not blocking. So once again, if you're a longsword enjoyer, then once you're holding your parry up, you move 10% faster. And actually, this perk is a little bit bugged. It says when you successfully block an attack, the next block is 50% faster. It's not actually just your next block, it is your next action that is 50% faster. So if you block an attack and then swing right after, your next swing comes out 50% faster. So if you hit a longsword parry, the next riposte, 50% faster. Which is it's actually the reason I choose this over something like counterattack here, which gives you attack speed and movement speed for 3 seconds after blocking, because generally speaking this is only going to get you about 2 hits, maybe 3 with the benefit, but that's pretty much all. And also, for this build, what you're going to do, instead of Adrenaline Rush, you're going to run Second Wind. Second Wind is generally the perk set you're going to run up right here. As you see, recover 50% HP over 12 seconds. Additionally, Second Wind alleviates the side effects of Adrenaline Rush, which isn't relevant to us because we're not running it. But Second Wind is going to be a one-time use, obviously, and the way to recover it is you have to sit at a campfire. And fun fact, I guess, is if you can only get this from a gray campfire if you have your teammate put it down for you while you're sitting down. White campfire above, you can put it down yourself and then sit down and get it. But if you have a gray campfire, have your teammate put it down for you while you're already sitting down, and you can recover your Second Wind. But Second Wind is just a great tool to have in a fight for a fighter who already has very hard to recover HP because they have no other recovery, and they're also going to take a ton of damage, whether that be from PvP or PvE, because generally this class is going to be the one tanking things and dealing with things in the form of monsters. whether by blocking them or just literally face tanking them, you know? And I think this right here is the best build. The one I showed before, the Slayer build, I think that's a very good early wipe build. I think generally you're going to want to start off with that and then transition into something like this once you get a little bit better plate armor. And then there obviously, I would like to go over like some of the other perks remaining that I haven't discussed. This is Adrenaline Spike. It's not very useful even in the Slayer build, because generally speaking, if you're getting below this 15% HP mark, you're probably going to die anyways. Like, it usually won't be useful. Combo attack. Honestly, this build could fit combo attack. I think you could definitely put it over Barricade if you have enough physical damage reduction, which is definitely possible in the current meta. If you're hitting 90% here, then you don't need this extra 15% from Barricade, because you're only actually going to get about 3%, because the cap sits at 92.7. So in that case, you can just put on like combo attack. Obviously, counter attack's fine. Projectile resistance again, although this isn't as needed once you're in full plate, because you'll have a ridiculous amount of damage reduction. Like, let me put this on. Like, this is some okay armor, and as you see here, 55% damage reduction, and where's my 37% projectile damage reduction. So I'm already going to take very, very little damage from arrows, and this is also without any jewelry, no cape, no shield on. So this 55% can easily be up to 70-80% with all my gear on. And then once you're taking 80% damage reduction and 40% projectile reduction, arrows already aren't going to do anything, and there aren't many other projectiles that are going to hit you that's actually going to matter for. And then dual wield, you're never going to run dual wield with a plate fighter build. You really don't have the movement speed to get into a fight, or just the damage to make this worthwhile. You're much better off going for a sword and shield or a heavy two-handed weapon, like a halberd or a spear. Slayer, obviously we can't use Slayer with plate armor. And then Weapon Mastery. Weapon Mastery is a potential one you can use here. You can run it over the Barricade or the Shield Mastery. Shield Mastery is obviously only necessary if you're using Longsword or Shield. If you're not using either of those, then Shield Mastery doesn't do anything for you. And in which case, like, let's say for example, that brings us to our next build. If we want to run like a Spear, or if we're running like a Halberd, then we keep Defense Mastery and Swift, and we go for Combo Attack. And then our last one is a toss-up. You can take Weapon Mastery to use a longbow or recurve bow, or you can take projectile resistance. These are really the only two you're going to look for. Me personally, I prefer the crossbow, so if I'm doing it, I'm always going to take projectile resistance. Like I just said, isn't that useful, but really the fighter doesn't have anything else that's going to benefit it. It's more useful than Adrenaline Spike, and none of these other ones really like help it, unless like if you decide to use a longbow. And even with this build, you're still going to go for second wind. All right, and now for weapon choices for the fighter. I personally think right now that the best weapon you can run is the Arming Sword and the Shield. This is a very nasty combo. The Shield gives you a free stat and a ton. You see obviously here the armor rating. It gives you a ton of armor rating, so it gives you a ton of extra free stats. And the Arming Sword is a very, very strong weapon that has a very, very fast attack chain. The main thing about the Arming Sword that sells it so much is the fact that the Arming Sword, you can swing really fast into another block. I mean, I think the Falchion is also another good choice to sit the pair here. The Falchion has a much higher per damage hit. Like, as you see, this green Falchion has 39 damage. This blue Arming Sword only has 31, and the disparity only increases with rarity going up. So Falchion has a much harder hit by hit. The one downside the Falchion has is the Falchion has only horizontal swings. And downside to this is it's much easier to hit the limbs of enemies. And if you hit limbs, you do a significantly amount of reduced damage as opposed to hitting the body or the head. And however, the Arming Sword, obviously, it has a downside as well, being its hits are mostly verticals. So the Arming Sword is much harder to cleave through enemies the way the Falchion does, because the Falchion has a big 180 degree hitbox, so it hits everything in front of you basically. Whereas the Arming Sword is much more, like I said, verticals. So you're more likely to hit the head of someone, but you're more likely to only hit one person as well, unless they are very stacked on top of each other. And then for other weapons, the Spear is a usable one. It's not that popular right now, but you don't see very many people using it. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure why. I mean, for me, I've never really been a spear enjoyer. It feels a very awkward weapon to use. And once people get on top of you, it feels like a very, very bad idea to have it. Then you have things like a halberd. I think a halberd's great. I think the halberd right now is the best it's ever been, for a reason I will go over momentarily. And then there's the longsword. I don't really like the longsword. I'm just going to say it. It's a fun weapon. I think, in my opinion, it's probably the most fun weapon to use in the game, but in terms of effectiveness, it's really not that good. If you are not consistently hitting the parries, then the weapon is just a much worse version of a spear and a halberd mix, because it basically has the moveset of a spear and a halberd, but with shorter range and lower damage. That's all it's got going for it right now. And those are pretty much like the only weapons I'm going to go over for fighter. Like those are like your bread and butter ones because those are the traditional ones. Yeah, sure, there are more you can use. I mean, I guess those for physical weapons at least. These are the only ones. And then for the ranged weapon of choice, it is going to be your crossbow or your longbow generally. And these two weapons do different things. The crossbow is much better for a single powerful hit at the start of a fight or the end of a fight. So if there's a team rushing you, you pull out your crossbow, you shoot them one time, you know, you hurt somebody really bad, especially if it's a backliner, and now they're starting to fight off below half HP, 70 or minus 70% of their HP or whatever. Longbow is a much better consistent DPS weapon. So if there's a fight where neither of you are pushing each other and you're just kind of poking each other, longbow is much better for that because it allows you to output more consistent DPS. Okay, now what I will go over is the best comps and character pairings with fighter. So if I go here and go to create a character, you see we have all the characters here. And the characters that I believe best pairs with fighter are two. I think it's the cleric and the bard. These are the two support characters in the game, and these are the best two pairings with fighter for different reasons. Cleric pairs obviously very well with fighter because fighter lacks that he really lacks healing that he wants to use frequently. Second wind is not a healing tool that you can frequently use, as you use it one time and then you must rest at a campfire to acquire it. Cleric fixes that. They allow you to tank rooms, tank enemies and everything while healing you, so you don't really care that much. And then Bard is obviously, if you've been playing the game, you know Bard is just an amazing character right now, and Bard has a ton of buffs that they give to their team. One of which being a movement speed buff, which is what I mentioned earlier, why I think the halberd's so good right now, because generally speaking, the halberd's issue is once you pull it out, you become incredibly slow because it has minus 50 move speed, and then it's very, very hard to get on top of people. Bard's movement speed buff makes that not as much of an issue because it gives you obviously the move speed to get on top of them and stay on top of them with the halberd. And generally with the halberd, if you're on top of someone for a second and a half, 2 seconds, they're going to die because of how high your damage is. So all you have to do is get on top of them for that 1 or 2 hits and you're going to kill them. And then Bard also has another really big buff where he gives armor and MR, which is the MR isn't as important. Does the fighter like it? Yes, but doesn't matter as much. Not quite. The big one is the armor. So this lets the fighter hit very, very high amounts of physical damage reduction without having to have as good of gear. Previously in old playtests, to be a fighter with 85-90% damage reduction, you had to have really, really good gear. But Bard basically just says, no, you don't have to do that. I got you. And they play their song, and it gives you like 10% damage reduction, which doesn't sound like much, but 10% damage reduction at 75-80% is a ginormous amount. Because a fighter at 70% compared to a fighter at 80 or 85% literally feels like a different character. At 70%, other geared people, like rangers, can still kill you pretty easily. At 85%, they are wasting their arrows to shoot you. And I do not mean that as a joke. They are literally wasting arrows to shoot you. They do no damage whatsoever. And other than just Cleric and Bard, I think there are other characters works well with. I think these two being Wizard and Ranger. Wizard because it allows them to buff you to start off a fight with haste and invis, or in haste and invisibility. So the Wizard you start the fight, like you know where a team is, you have a door open and a path to them. The Wizard hastes you, they invis you, or they haste you, you pop sprint, they invis you. You run into the fight before they even know you're there. You pick one target and kill them. Like you pick the squishiest target, kill them. Like for example, if the enemy team has a wizard, you run straight to the wizard, you kill him, you eliminate him out of the fight. The wizard can do this to other characters, but obviously, it's just as good with them. But it helps fighter a lot because fighter can have a hard time starting a fight off, especially against an enemy wizard. So if you're able to eliminate them from the very beginning, that is a huge, huge boon, and you pretty much win the fight off the rip. And then Ranger. This one's a little bit. The reason this one's good is a little bit different is because the biggest counter in the game the counter to fighter in the game is Wizard, and the biggest counter to Wizard in the game is Ranger. So Rangers really help fighters in the sense that they can get rid of Wizards, and you don't have to just like face tank them and hope you can make it to them before you die, which generally speaking you're never going to be able to. So Ranger pairs very, very well with fighter. And then, other than this, I think they're the best comps to run with fighter in total, not just one character. I think one that's been incredibly strong right now is Ranger, Cleric, and fighter. And while this does seem to have relatively low magic damage, you have your cleric run Holy Strike and Earthquake, and then you can deal with enemy fighters or enemy engages very, very well. You just pick one spot, you defend it with you defend it with Ranger with Bear Traps, Cleric with Earthquake, Holy Strike, and the fighter, you are pretty much here to prevent the people from making it to your Cleric and your Ranger. Are you going to be doing a lot of damage in this comp as a fighter? Generally, no, because honestly, most of the time, enemies won't even make it to you. You are literally there as a wall to prevent them from getting to your team. And that is most of the time what you're going to do as a fighter. So you might not feel like on this character you're killing a lot of people, but that's okay. If you are sitting there and you are preventing one or two people from even walking past you because you're hitting them and they have to turn to hit you, then you are doing your job as a fighter. If you are creating that space, like I mentioned earlier, for your team to play, then you are going to win almost every single fight if your team plays it correctly and you play it correctly. And that is the way that fighter is currently working. And then another composition, I think, which is a much more aggressive one, is Bard, Cleric, and Fighter, or even Bard, Wizard, Fighter. You just pair Fighter with Bard plus one more character. And generally what this does is, it's called a buff ball comp, and what that means is you buff one person up, and all three of you run around the map as a death ball, and you just obliterate anything you run into. And this one shows Fighter having a much more aggressive playstyle than defensive. You are going to be the first one in the fight. You are going to try to be killing people as fast as possible and going to the next fight just as fast. That's why Bard's so strong right now, is because he allows like Fighter or Barbarian or really any class to do that, where they can just sprint around, kill a bunch of people, and go into the next fight, pretty much be fine. Even in this comp, you don't actually need the Cleric, because with Bard buffs, you really don't take that much damage. And sure, sometimes you're gonna have to use your second wind here as your only source of healing, but that's okay. If you pop your second wind and it causes you to win a fight, like that's good. Like that was a good use of your cooldown. So like don't be afraid to hold the second wind in a fight because you're worried I only have a one-time use second wind. I'm like, what if I need it later? Or like something like that. If you think your second wind is gonna win you a fight, always pop it. Always. It is better to use it and win than not use it and die. Like always, obviously. I've had many fights where if you look at the team comp, and let's say like you're looking at like a ranger, a wizard, and a fighter yourself, and like you start this fight off, sometimes when you walk into a fight, you can walk at the fight 100% HP, and you pop second wind right there when you start the fight at 100% HP, because you know you are going to take damage and you are going to need it, and you are not going to have that chance later, because second wind does last 12 seconds. And over that 12 seconds, sure, maybe you missed the first 2 seconds of healing, but for the next 10 seconds, you're getting all that healing, and you didn't have to try to like stop doing something in a fight to pop it. Whether that be stop blocking, stop swinging, whatever it may be. And so for those reasons, those are the characters I think pair best with Fighter. And just to reiterate, Fighter, Cleric, Bard, I think is a very strong one. Or Cleric, Ranger, Fighter. These two are very strong. And then obviously there are some more, like I said, like Bard, Wizard, Fighter, Bard, anything Fighter. I think Bard Fighter is just a strong combination right now, and you pair any third class with it, it's obviously going to work incredibly well. And now back to what I was doing. I think my last thing I want to go over here is gear choices itemization. I get asked this a lot, like what kind of gear are you wearing, what's the best, what do you prefer, and I'm not going to go over weapons here because I already went over weapons. This is mostly just going to focus on armor. Now, the big question here is what kind of chest piece you use. The main three options are you have a Fine Cuirass, you have a Templar armor, and then if he has one, there's armor, and then you have, well, he doesn't, you have Darkblade. So, and obviously all three have their benefits. Fine Cuirass is obviously the most armor rating one with the lowest magic resistance and the lowest movement speed. This is going to be your generic bread and butter physical defense tanky Cuirass right here. This is what you're going to use when you just need to tank only physical damage. You don't really care about your movement speed. You don't care about your magic resistance. You literally are just going for a pure physical defense tank. Templar armor, however, just like Darkblade, it has less overall armor rating, but it does give you magic resistance, and it gives you less movement speed debuff. Obviously, you see here -35 compared to -10. If you're wondering what that is, it's literally just this number right here. This is just this flat number it takes away. So you see like here, 260. There you go. But anyways, like I was saying, and obviously you see like that's a different number, but that's because of the it wasn't like the flat 15, but obviously it's because of Swift. But yeah, so Templar armor, my personal preference, I don't actually have one right now, but my personal preference is Dark Plate. I think Dark Plate is incredibly strong. The good mix between the movement speed the movement speed debuff and the magic resistance you're getting, also having a good armor rating. It's kind of the in between here between Cuirass and Templar armor, where it's a little bit slower than Templar armor, but a little bit tankier, while also having more magic res. And then obviously it's has less armor rating than this, but it's not as slow, and it has more magic resistance. Darkplate is the premier magic resistance armor you can go, and the most you can really stack in one item because it gives you 40 magic resistance, which generally speaking, it's not super helpful because unless you stack a ton of this magic resistance, it is nice, but having 20% from Darkplate is much, much better than having negative 10% magic from what you see here with what I have on. And this is a very common occurrence when you have plate armor on, is having a negative magic resist number. And then, other than chest pieces, I think for helmet, you always want to go Hound Skull. Just 100%. A green Hound Skull is better than a purple version of almost every other helmet. Your really only two choices for helmets are Hound Skull and the Armet, because those are the ones with the best headshot damage reduction and the best armor rating. The Armet is a little bit lower than the Hound Skull with 18% headshot damage reduction, so it's not that much, but the armor rating actually is a pretty big difference, because the Hound Skull just has a significant amount more. And then you have gloves, legs, and boots. I think for these, it's pretty cut and dry. You can go plates. I think the best pants slot is the heavy leather leggings, which is the leggings that give +1 strength, and they don't have much less armor, but I do believe those are the best ones to use for pants. I will see if I can find an example to show you guys really quick. My armor have one. Obviously, my armor does not have one. We will go into fighter chat and see if we can find heavy leather leggings. And if not, then unlucky. Let's see. Anyone selling them? No, no one's selling them. Maybe they're selling them in barb chat. Let's go. This is very professional. Heavy leather leggings? Whoops. No one's selling them either. So I don't have any, so that's unlucky. But anyways, I think heavy leather leggings are your best in slot pants, because once your gear is really, really good, you won't actually need that extra around 9 to 10 armor rating from plate. And also, it gives you less movement speed debuff while also giving you 1 strength, which, as mentioned earlier, is a very valuable stat to fighter. And then I think plate boots are always fine. These give you 1 strength. They give you a lot of armor. So it's just, these are perfectly fine. And then for gloves, heavy gauntlets are usually going to be your best. Riveted gloves are a potential one because they also do give you 1 strength. But to use riveted gloves, you need really, really good gear, and you need really, really high stat rolls on them. Then for your ring slots and your cape slot, I think the best cape is going to be the Tattered Cloak. As you see here, the blue one, 3 strength. This one gives armor rating and spell capacity. Ideally, you're going to want something like 3 strength, either damage reduction or armor rating, and then you're going to want to go for, then you're going to want to look for like a damage stat or like an all attribute stat, or like, flat agility added or something like that. For your jewelry, I personally believe that the Ring of Courages and the Ox Pendant is the best, because I do prefer the Strength Fighter to the Agi Fighter. But obviously there are people that like Agi, and I do believe I have a good Agi ring. Yeah, like this one. Like this right here is a amazing pendant for a fighter. It's only a blue, but this gives everything you want. 3 Agi, +1 all, physical damage reduction. These stats right here are the main things you should be prioritizing on a fighter. If you see anything that has physical damage reduction, even sometimes, you'll see people using, like this one. This has 2 will, but then it has armor rating, which equals physical damage reduction. Like, this is a usable pendant for a fighter, even though will doesn't really matter that much, just because that's how important it is to stack armor on this character. And then, like I said, for your rings, just go Rings of Courage. You're going to want to look for stat rolls similar to these. 2 strength, +1 all, 4 max HP. This is just giving you a lot of extra defensive stats. Ideally, once again, you're going to want something like this. Like, this is probably one of the best rolls you can get, which gives you a ton of armor, a ton of agility, and a ton of strength. This is an amazing necklace, even though the rolls look very simple. And this is just something wonderful to have. And then the last thing I want to go over, just to be sure, to reiterate it, is other than these base stats, what order would I prioritize my actual stats on my character and on my gear overall? Well, rank 1 will always be physical damage reduction and armor rating. I say and, not or, because these stats are interchangeable depending on the role you get. Like, for example, you see these here, these have 10 armor rating, versus this right here is 2% physical damage reduction, and this one's 1.8%. So what is it? What is 10 armor rating? How much damage reduction is this? Well, each 5 points of armor rating is roughly about 1% damage reduction. So 10 armor rating is roughly equivalent to 2% physical damage reduction. So for this reasoning is, if you have something with like a 5 armor rating roll versus 2% physical damage reduction, the 2% is always going to be better. However, if you had like 15 armor rating compared to this 2%, I'm going to take the 15 armor rating over it. And generally, that's why I say and. So the stats are basically interchangeable. You just prioritize whichever one is the higher roll. And then after this, I personally really like going strength. I mean, I think the Agi fighter is good, and it gives you a lot of attack speed, a lot of movement speed, a lot of mobility. But me personally, I like going into the strength build. The reason being is one point of strength only gives you 2 HP, but when you have a ton of damage reduction, each 2 points of HP is effectively a lot more because they have to do a lot more damage to break that 2 points of HP and take you down. Also, having a ton of base HP helps with magic damage, which you suffer for very, very heavily. If you have a low amount of HP and low magic resistance, then it's really easy to die in 1 to 2 spells from a wizard. But if you have a ton of HP, even if you're taking more damage from them, they still have to break through that giant HP pool that you have. And yeah, so I think that just about covers everything for a fighter in terms of gear. Yeah, so like, just the last thing to go over is, I think, plate armor is very good. I think there's a lot of viable builds for the character. I do think fighter can be a difficult character to get into. I will not deny it. When I first played this game and I tried fighter, I didn't like the character. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't find it fun. The starting gear is very, very hard to get used to. You start with like some very weak armor and a very weak sword, a very weak shield, and blocking in this game is quite actually difficult. So getting into fighter can be very hard. My recommendation, like I said before, is you just run this Slayer build here, and then as you're using Slayer, you want to try to gear up, get around green plate armor stacked up in your inventory, or just really anything good. That is the selling point of fighter. Is fighter can wear any gear they want pretty much. And so for fighter, when you're gearing up, if you get something green with weapon damage, throw it on. Put on the best gear you possibly pull and just keep on going. And while fighter starts off very slow, they can snowball very fast once they start putting on some good gear and getting some really good stats from their stuff. But anyways, I hope this is very helpful in what I wanted to do. And if you have any more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I will try my best to answer them. There are obviously going to be some things I missed in this video because I kind of just did this one-off. I have a notepad beside me with like some things I wanted to go over. And yeah, I just, like I said, hope this is helpful. Hope this helps anyone get into the character. Hope it helps you keep playing the character, make you want to play the character. And yeah, I stream fighter gameplay over at Twitch. I'll leave my Twitch down below, so feel free to come follow and watch me. I'll be live soon, whenever that may be. But yeah, thanks for watching. Peace.